At precisely 8 o'clock, when the chandeliers of Ashbourne Hall were meant to blaze in unanimous welcome, a hush fell instead, thin as frost, and Lady Eliza Hartwell felt it settle upon her shoulders before she crossed the threshold. The violins faltered, bows hesitating midair, and conversation thinned into a careful murmur, as though her name had been spoken too loudly by the walls themselves. She paused only a moment, gloved fingers tightening around the ivory handle of her fan, then stepped forward with the composure of one long acquainted with disappointment. She wore mourning black, though no death had been publicly declared. The silk caught the light reluctantly, swallowing brilliance rather than reflecting it, and her hair was arranged with austere precision, as if softness itself might invite cruelty. Faces turned, some in pity, more in satisfaction, and none in welcome. It had been decided, long before her arrival, that she no longer belonged among them, yet curiosity demanded a spectacle, and so they watched. Only a fortnight earlier, Lady Eliza's presence had been sought, her laughter admired, her opinions requested with flattering insistence. Now those same admirers leaned away, whispering behind fans and folded programs, trading fragments of a story that had grown more lurid with each retelling. Betrayed, they said, though by whom remained deliciously unclear. Bound, they added, to a promise she had no right to make. Forbidden, they concluded, as though the word itself were a verdict pronounced by nature. Eliza advanced through the ballroom alone. No escort offered an arm, no hostess hurried forward to claim her. She felt the weight of every step, the way one feels the slow turning of a lock. Her chin lifted not in defiance, but in preservation, and she fixed her gaze upon the far windows, where rain traced crooked paths down the glass, seeking escape. At the center of the room stood the Duke of Ravensmere. Tall, immaculately composed, he was a figure accustomed to deference, his presence shaping the space around him like gravity. Conversation bent toward him instinctively, yet tonight his attention seemed withdrawn, his expression unreadable beneath the fall of candlelight. When his eyes found Eliza, the faintest change passed through them, swift enough to be missed by all but her. She had known the Duke since girlhood, though never intimately. Their encounters had been polite, measured, bound by rank and expectation. He had once praised her reading of Milton, another time remarked upon the steadiness of her character. Nothing more. Nothing dangerous. Yet now, in the wake of her disgrace, his gaze did not slide away. It held. The orchestra resumed, uncertainly, and the evening lurched onward. Eliza took her place at the periphery, near a marble column cool beneath her palm. Laughter swelled and receded like a tide that refused her shore. A young matron she had once comforted during childbirth turned her back. An elderly baroness offered a thin nod, as one might acknowledge a ghost. Eliza accepted these small violences in silence, schooling her breath to calm. She thought of the letter that had undone her, its seal broken by hands not her own, its contents revealed to the very people who would delight in misunderstanding them. She thought of trust given too freely, of loyalty repaid with ruin. Shame burned, sharp and private, but beneath it lay a deeper ache, the knowledge that truth, once scattered, could not be gathered whole. Across the room, the Duke was being addressed by his mother, the Dowager Duchess, her expression carved from marble restraint. Eliza saw the tension in his jaw, the stillness of a man listening to counsel he did not welcome. The Ravensmere name carried centuries of obedience to tradition, to blood, to duty. She wondered, distantly, whether it would now be wielded against her. A footman approached with a tray of champagne. Eliza declined with a faint shake of her head, aware that any indulgence would be recast as moral failure. She folded her fan, pressing it flat against her bodice, a reminder to remain contained. The music swelled into a waltz, couples assembling with eager relief. Still no one sought her hand. Then, improbably, movement stirred at the heart of the room. The Duke stepped away from his mother. He crossed the floor with deliberate calm, his path cutting through clusters of nobility like a blade through silk. Murmurs rose, sharp with disbelief. Eliza felt her pulse quicken, dread and something more treacherous entwining. He stopped before her. For a moment, neither spoke. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the faint scent of rain and beeswax, to the sound of her own heartbeat. His bow was impeccable, his voice low, measured, and unmistakably public. "Lady Eliza," he said, offering his hand, "You appear in need of a partner." The silence that followed was absolute, and in it, Eliza understood that whatever she chose next would bind them both to consequences neither could yet name. She hesitated, aware that acceptance would inflame the very tongues already sharpened against her, while refusal might spare him and condemn her utterly. Around them, fans stilled, breaths held, reputations poised upon a single inclination of her head. She searched his face for mockery and found none, only a gravity that acknowledged the cost of what he offered. In that instant, the ballroom ceased to be a place of judgment and became instead a threshold. Eliza felt the past fortnight compress into a single, fragile moment, all loss and longing distilled. If she took his hand, the rumors would no longer be whispers but proclamations, and she would be marked not merely as fallen, but as chosen. If she did not, she would remain alone, preserved but erased. Her fingers trembled within her glove, hovering inches from his. Somewhere beyond the windows, thunder rolled, distant yet inevitable, and Eliza sensed that the life she had known was already receding, making room for something perilous, luminous, and irrevocably changed by his choice. The following morning dawned colorless and raw, the sort of winter light that revealed rather than softened the truths of stone and skin. Eliza Hartwell woke with the echo of the Duke's voice still resonant in her thoughts, not as a comfort but as a weight. By nightfall, the dance would already be reshaped into rumor, his offered hand transformed into accusation. She dressed slowly, deliberately, choosing restraint over beauty, as though modesty might shield her from interpretation. By noon, the first consequence arrived. A small parcel was delivered to her door, wrapped in plain brown paper, bearing no crest. Inside lay her gloves, the very pair she had misplaced weeks earlier, immaculate and mended, a loose seam restored with careful stitches. No note accompanied them, yet she knew at once whose intervention it was. The gloves were not merely returned, they were corrected, preserved, dignified. She pressed them briefly to her chest, then set them aside, aware that gratitude itself had become a peril. The city responded more swiftly than she had anticipated. By afternoon, carriages slowed conspicuously before her windows, and by evening, a pamphlet circulated among the clubs and drawing-rooms, its language florid with condemnation. It spoke of a woman who had ensnared noble sympathy through artifice, whose disgrace now threatened to stain a venerable house. Eliza read the borrowed copy without flinching, folding it carefully before the ink could poison her resolve. That same evening, she was summoned to tea by a cousin who had not written in months. The invitation was framed as concern, yet the parlor crackled with judgment. Questions were posed as inquiries, silence wielded as rebuke. When Eliza declined to confess to crimes she had not committed, the air grew brittle. Upon departure, she was reminded, gently, that gratitude was expected when mercy was extended. Across the city, the Duke of Ravensmere endured a reckoning of his own. His steward brought reports of whispered bets placed upon his reputation. His mother spoke of alliances endangered by reckless gallantry, and his peers watched with undisguised interest. Still, when a note arrived bearing Eliza's hand, requesting the return of the gloves to be forgotten, he declined to respond. Silence, he decided, would speak more honestly than reassurance. Days passed, each marked by smaller gestures that reverberated with outsized consequence. A seat saved beside him at the opera. A book delivered anonymously, its margins marked with passages of solace. A glance held one heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. Each kindness became a spark, and each spark ablaze in the collective imagination. Eliza felt herself both warmed and endangered by the attention, aware that even innocence, once illuminated, could be cast as threat. The most dangerous token came unexpectedly. At a charity exhibition held beneath vaulted ceilings, Eliza stood examining a landscape when a familiar presence settled beside her. The Duke did not address her. He merely placed his catalogue upon the table between them, his finger resting lightly upon an engraving of a ruined abbey. Beneath it, in neat script, was written a single line: "What endures is not what remains unbroken." The gesture was small, intimate, and devastating. Those nearby noticed. By evening, the line was repeated with embellishment, its meaning distorted into promise or provocation according to the teller's taste. Eliza returned home trembling, the catalogue pressed against her ribs, her heart racing not with hope but with fear. She had become a symbol, and symbols were rarely spared. That night, she burned the pamphlet in her hearth, watching accusation curl into ash. Yet she kept the catalogue. To destroy it would have been a denial she could no longer afford. The Duke's restraint, his careful distance, only sharpened the danger. He was not careless. He was choosing. When another letter arrived, this one unsigned yet unmistakably cruel, Eliza understood that kindness had invited a reckoning neither of them could evade. The letter warned that mercy would not be mistaken for virtue again. It spoke of bloodlines and boundaries, of punishments that followed defiance. Eliza folded it with steady hands, her mind fixed not on the threat, but on the man who had first crossed the line to return what was hers. In a world governed by silence and surveillance, he had dared to be seen, and in doing so had made her visible once more, not as a fallen woman, but as a contested truth whose defense now demanded a cost yet uncounted. The invitation arrived without flourish, delivered by a footman whose eyes revealed nothing and everything. Eliza read the single line twice before the meaning settled into her bones. The Duke requested her presence at Ravensmere House that evening, not as a guest to be received, but as a matter to be spoken of privately. No hour was specified, only dusk, that uncertain margin between visibility and concealment. She understood at once that refusal would be safer, and also impossible. Ravensmere House loomed against the gathering dark like a watchful conscience. Eliza was ushered through corridors hushed by velvet and age, the walls bearing portraits of ancestors whose gazes seemed sharpened by disapproval. The library awaited her, its tall windows shrouded, its fire burning low. The Duke stood with his back to the hearth, his posture composed, his expression unreadable until he turned. He did not bow. He did not smile. Instead, he inclined his head with solemn acknowledgment, as though greeting an equal at the edge of battle. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It pressed, laden with words withheld too long. "You should not have come," he said at last, his voice calm but weighted. "And yet, I am relieved that you did." Eliza removed her gloves slowly, laying them upon the table between them like an offering. "I did not come for relief, Your Grace," she replied. "I came because what is being said will soon become immutable, unless truth intervenes." He gestured to a chair, but she remained standing. The firelight caught in her eyes, revealing exhaustion she had not permitted herself to feel. "They accuse you of entanglement," he said carefully, "of manipulation, of ambition beyond your station." "They accuse me of silence," she answered, "and they mistake it for guilt." At that, something in him shifted. He moved closer, not in intrusion but in attention, as though drawing nearer might clarify the shape of her restraint. "Then speak," he said. "Here, where no audience waits." Eliza drew a breath that trembled despite her effort. She spoke not quickly, nor dramatically, but with the steady precision of one who had rehearsed endurance rather than explanation. She told him of the letter written in confidence, never meant to be shared, of the cousin who had promised discretion and instead sold implication to the highest bidder, of a conversation overheard, recast, and paraded as confession. She did not name her betrayer at first, as though uttering the truth aloud might solidify its cruelty. The Duke listened without interruption. His hands remained clasped behind his back, his face composed, yet his eyes darkened with each measured revelation. When she finished, the fire had sunk lower, casting longer shadows. "You were bound by loyalty," he said quietly, "and punished for it." Eliza's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. "I was bound by belief. That kindness might be reciprocated. That discretion would be honored. And forbidden," he continued, voice firming, "by a society that permits no complexity in women it cannot control." She met his gaze then, truly, and in it she saw no pity. What she saw was recognition, and something more dangerous still. Resolve. "I do not ask for defense," she said, her voice low. "Only understanding. If my presence endangers your name, say so now. I will remove myself from every space you occupy." The Duke stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of the fire was eclipsed by the nearness of his form. "You misunderstand," he said. "Your presence does not endanger my name. It exposes the fragility of those who wield it. The words struck her with unexpected force. For the first time since her disgrace, Eliza felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not with collapse, but with possibility. She turned away, fearing the weight of hope more than despair. "I cannot be the reason you are undone," she whispered. He did not reach for her. He did not touch her at all. Yet his voice, when it came, held her as firmly as any embrace. "You are not my undoing," he said. "You are the measure of what I am willing to endure." The confession was not a declaration of love, yet it burned with the same intensity. Eliza felt the tears she had refused for weeks press against her restraint. She steadied herself, knowing that to yield now would be to invite a vulnerability she was not yet prepared to survive. "There are letters," she said suddenly. "Proof. If revealed, they would confirm my innocence and condemn another. But to release them would be to invite a war I am not certain you wish to fight." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Whose name do they bear?" She hesitated only a moment. "Your mother's." The silence that followed was absolute. The fire cracked softly, indifferent to lineage and consequence. In that instant, Eliza understood the full measure of the truth she had carried, and the cost of placing it between them. The Duke did not recoil. He did not speak. He merely closed his eyes, as though committing himself to a path already chosen, and when he opened them again, Eliza knew that whatever remained of safety had just been surrendered, and that the next step, once taken, would not allow retreat. The summons to the family council was delivered at dawn, sealed in wax bearing the Ravensmere crest pressed so deeply it seemed meant to bruise. Eliza did not receive such a summons, yet she felt its weight all the same, as though the air itself carried the news to her lungs. By evening, the house would convene, and decisions made there would ripple outward, touching her life whether she was present or not. She spent the hours in quiet vigilance, pacing a narrow line between dread and resolve. The council chamber was a place of history and judgment, its walls paneled in dark oak polished by centuries of consequence. The Duke entered alone, his bearing unbowed, though the cost of defiance already shadowed his features. Around the long table sat those who had shaped him since birth, his mother, immaculate and composed, his uncle, sharp-eyed and severe, distant cousins whose fortunes were tied to his compliance. Their gazes fixed upon him not with affection, but expectation. His mother spoke first, her voice measured and cool. She named the scandal without naming Eliza, spoke of impropriety, of danger to legacy, of the necessity of correction. She reminded him of his obligations, of bloodlines carefully preserved, of the sacrifices already made to secure his position. The others murmured assent, the sound like a tide pressing toward inevitability. When the Duke answered, it was not with argument, but with clarity. He acknowledged the scandal and refused its framing. He spoke of honor not as appearance, but as action, and of lineage not as inheritance, but as responsibility. He did not raise his voice. He did not apologize. Each word landed with deliberate weight, unsettling the room not by force, but by conviction. At last, he spoke Eliza's name. The effect was immediate. His uncle struck the table with his palm. His mother's composure fractured, if only for a breath. To name her was to grant her presence, and presence was power. The Duke did not retreat. He stated plainly that the accusations against her were false, that the betrayal had been engineered, and that he possessed knowledge sufficient to dismantle the narrative if pressed. Silence followed, thick and dangerous. His mother stood then, her gaze fixed upon him with something like disbelief. She warned him that to continue would be to sever himself from protection, from privilege, from the very structure that sustained him. She reminded him that love was transient, but consequence enduring. The Duke listened. Then he removed the signet ring from his hand and placed it upon the table. The sound it made was small, almost delicate, yet it reverberated like a gunshot. He declared that if honor demanded abandonment of cruelty, then he would abandon cruelty. If his title required injustice, then he would lay it down. He did not threaten. He chose. Word of the council's outcome spread swiftly, as such things always did. By the following morning, whispers had grown into proclamation. The Duke of Ravensmere had defied his house. He had refused to repudiate the disgraced woman. He had relinquished certain privileges, though not yet the title itself, pending further negotiation. Society reeled, recalibrating its judgments with unseemly haste. Eliza learned of it from a servant who could not hide her astonishment. She received the news without tears, without triumph. Instead, a quiet terror unfurled within her. She had offered truth, not sacrifice. To know that he had chosen consequence on her behalf was a burden she had not sought, and one she feared she could not bear. They met that evening in the same library where truth had first been spoken. The fire burned brighter now, though the warmth did little to ease the tension that filled the room. The Duke looked altered, not diminished, but sharpened, as though something extraneous had been stripped away. "You should not have done this," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "I did not ask you to give up your world." He met her gaze without hesitation. "I did not give it up," he replied. "I examined it, and found it wanting." She turned away, pressing her palm against the window-pane, cold biting through the glass. "They will never forgive you," she said. "They will wait, and they will wound." "They already have," he answered. "The difference is that now, they do not wound in silence." He stepped closer, careful, deliberate. "I cannot promise ease," he continued. "Only truth. Only that I will not allow you to stand alone while they name you a sin." At that, Eliza faced him, tears finally breaking free, not in collapse but in release. "Then you will be ruined," she whispered. He lifted his hand, stopping just short of touching her cheek. "Then let me be ruined by something worth preserving." The words settled between them, irrevocable. Outside, the bells of the city tolled the hour, marking not merely time, but transition. Eliza understood that his declaration had reshaped more than reputation. It had altered the future's architecture. Yet even as relief bloomed, a sharper realization followed close behind. The letters remained unrevealed, his mother's involvement still a blade held in reserve. His stand had been made without drawing blood, and the reckoning he had postponed now loomed larger than before. As they stood facing one another, bound by choice and consequence, Eliza knew that the hardest decision had not yet been made, and that love, once declared, would soon demand its final unforgiving proof. The reckoning did not arrive with spectacle, but with quiet resolve. The Duke requested one final audience, not with his family, but with the solicitors who guarded the machinery of his inheritance. Eliza waited in an antechamber smelling of dust and ink, listening to the scratch of pens that would redraw the boundaries of his life. When he emerged hours later, his expression was composed, yet something irrevocable had passed through him, leaving a stillness that felt like peace earned through fire. He told her nothing at first. He only took her hand, bare and unadorned, and led her from the house that had defined his name. They walked without carriage through streets damp with evening mist, past gas lamps flickering like uncertain witnesses. The city watched them go with the same curiosity it had once reserved for scandal, yet now there was confusion in the gaze that followed. Power, once stripped of its symbols, became difficult to recognize. They took refuge beyond the city, in a small estate long neglected, its stones softened by ivy and years of indifference. There were no servants waiting in rows, no heraldry etched above the door. Eliza crossed the threshold with a hesitation born not of fear, but of wonder. This was not exile. It was choice made visible. The days that followed tested that choice with relentless honesty. Roofs leaked. Accounts required tending. The Duke learned the cost of bread, the patience of repair, the humility of asking rather than commanding. Eliza, who had long been schooled in restraint, discovered the freedom of shaping her hours without permission. Together they argued, faltered, laughed, and learned the language of partnership not as romance, but as practice. Love revealed itself not in grand gestures, but in persistence. There were moments when memory returned with teeth. A carriage crest glimpsed on a distant road, a familiar surname spoken carelessly by a visitor, could still tighten the air between them. In those moments, the Duke would still, and Eliza would wait, allowing the past to pass through without dominion. They learned that healing was not erasure, but permission to remember without surrender. Each night, they spoke not of what had been taken, but of what remained possible. The world beyond their gates continued its rituals of rank and reward, yet its power diminished with distance, becoming something they could observe rather than obey. In choosing obscurity, they discovered clarity, and in relinquishing command, they gained consent, a gentler authority shaped by mutual regard rather than decree. Their home filled slowly with marks of living: worn steps, ink-stained desks, chairs angled toward one another by habit. These details, unnoticed by history, became their testament. No decree could equal the meaning found in mornings earned together, nor rival the dignity of choosing love without witnesses. Such constancy, quietly sustained, proved the boldest rebellion of all. It asked nothing of crowns, yet endured beyond them. This was the victory neither scandal nor silence could undo. It endured. It remained, steadfast and chosen. Forever, quietly theirs. The letter revealing the truth was never sent. The Duke burned it himself, feeding it to the hearth until his mother's name dissolved into ash. He did not forgive her, nor did he condemn her publicly. He chose instead to end the cycle that demanded destruction as proof of righteousness. Eliza watched the paper curl and vanish, understanding that justice sometimes lay not in exposure, but in refusal. Winter settled gently upon their days. They learned the shape of ordinary hours together, the intimacy of shared silence, the labor of tending what no longer tended itself. Eliza discovered in the Duke a patience she had never seen, a humility born not of loss, but of clarity. He discovered in her a joy unburdened by vigilance, laughter that required no defense. Letters arrived, first cautious, then sparse, then not at all. Society, deprived of resistance, turned its attention elsewhere. Titles shifted hands. Names faded. What endured was not what had been inherited, but what had been chosen and sustained. In the absence of spectacle, their love grew unremarkable to the world, and therefore invincible. One evening, as spring announced itself with hesitant blossoms, the Duke placed a simple ring into Eliza's palm. There was no audience, no proclamation. "If you wish," he said, his voice steady, "we will remain precisely as we are." The offer was not of possession, but of continuation. Eliza closed her fingers around the ring and met his gaze without doubt. "I have already chosen," she replied. They married beneath open sky, the ceremony witnessed only by birds and wind. Eliza wore white not as defiance, but as renewal. The Duke spoke no vows of dominion, only of presence. When they sealed their union, it was with a reverence born of survival, not conquest. Love, stripped of power, revealed itself as endurance. Years passed. The Duke became simply a man, known for fairness and quiet generosity. Eliza became a woman unafraid to speak, her past no longer a shadow, but a foundation. Together, they cultivated a life that asked nothing of applause. The world did not sing of them. History did not record them. Yet within the small circumference of their days, something rare persisted. On the anniversary of their leaving, Eliza found the Duke standing at the edge of the property, watching the horizon darken. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, not accusing, but curious. He turned to her, the lines at his eyes softened by time. "Only that I did not choose sooner," he answered. As night fell, the last light touched the fields they now called home. Eliza leaned into him, the memory of chandeliers and judgment distant as another life. What they had lost no longer mattered. What they had kept required tending, and they tended it together. In relinquishing the future that had been designed for them, they had claimed one entirely their own, and in that quiet sovereignty, love endured, unremarkable, unrecorded, and eternal.